James for that reading. And yes, James was supposed to read from Acts 1. And yes, I'm still preaching from Daniel 4. So everyone relax. Everything's just fine. But what does Daniel 4 have to do with a group of disciples staring into heaven in Acts 1? Well, that will soon come clear, soon enough, I hope. But let's first remember where we have been. For the last few weeks, we have been journeying through the book of Daniel, a book of many dreams and visions. And one dream, one vision we have already looked at. In Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar was shown the future. Babylon was a glorious and powerful head of gold on top of this terrifying statue, a statue made from other materials and metals. But the statue would not stand forever. A stone would come and knock the whole thing down, only for itself to grow into a mighty mountain. It symbolized how over the years kingdoms will come and go, but in the end, God would establish a kingdom that will never be destroyed. His own kingdom. Then, as we saw last week in Daniel 3, Nebuchadnezzar attempted to defy God by building the very statue he saw in his dream, only made entirely out of gold. It was Nebuchadnezzar's way of telling God, nope, that's not going to happen. Nebuchadnezzar was determined to ensure the dream would not come true. But when God protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar was finally forced to acknowledge the power and sovereignty of the Most High God. That was all last week. So here now we turn to Daniel 4. And we might think that Nebuchadnezzar had finally simmered down. But no. He had another dream, another warning, another humbling. And this time the problem is not only the king's pride, as so many have come to this chapter to read and believe. The dream and its interpretation isn't just about Nebuchadnezzar's pride. It is also about what his pride caused him to forget. Why had God given his kingdom in the first place? What responsibilities came with his greatness? And what happens when people neglect their God-given responsibilities? Daniel chapter 4. And as I said earlier, Daniel 4 is one of the most intriguing chapters of the Old Testament. After all, it is written mostly in first person as a royal proclamation from Nebuchadnezzar himself to his entire kingdom, or as he put it, to all peoples, nations, and languages. In other words, Daniel did not write Daniel 4, at least not all of it. This is Nebuchadnezzar's own personal testimony. And he begins by telling us that one day, when he was at ease in his house and prospering in his palace, he had a dream that made him afraid. And so once again, much like he did after his first dream, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Babylon's magicians and enchanters, Chaldeans and astrologers. Only this time he told them the dream, but they still couldn't interpret it. So finally, Daniel comes in before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar tells Daniel how he had this dream. And in this dream, he saw this enormous tree in the middle of the earth. It grew strong. Its top reached the heavens. Its leaves were beautiful. Its fruit were abundant. Animals found shade beneath it. Birds lived in its branches, and in it was food for all. But then as the dream went on, a heavenly watcher, so an angel, came down and ordered that the tree be cut down. The tree was to be stripped and cut down, although its stump would remain. The person represented by the tree would be driven away from humanity, live among the animals, and receive the mind of a beast until 7 periods of time had passed over. But unlike chapter 2, when God revealed the dream and its interpretation to Daniel, this time Daniel did not need to go away and think about it or pray about it in order to understand what it meant. He knew straight away what this dream meant, and he was greatly alarmed. The tree was Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel tells the king, and Nebuchadnezzar would be removed from human society until he learnt that the Most High God rules over every human kingdom. And after telling him this, Daniel pleads with Nebuchadnezzar to practice righteousness and to show mercy to the oppressed. But as the chapter goes on, 12 months later, while Nebuchadnezzar was admiring Babylon and congratulating himself, the judgment fell. He lost his reason, lived like an animal, and remained that way until he lifted his eyes upward to heaven. Only then did his reason return, his kingdom was restored, and the chapter ends with him praising the God of heaven. That is Daniel chapter 4 in a nutshell. But did it actually happen? Did it actually happen? That's the first question I'd like for us to unpack for a moment. Because you would think, wouldn't you, that if Nebuchadnezzar, right, the great and mighty king of Babylon, known in history, lost his mind and became like an animal for a few years, someone would have noticed and someone would have written it down. Or perhaps they did. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they were discovered in Qumran roughly 80 years ago, in them they found this very interesting, very intriguing Aramaic text called the Prayer of Nabonidus. The Prayer of Nabonidus. Now, Nabonidus was Babylon's final king before Babylon's destruction. He was also Belshazzar's father. Belshazzar, of course, features in the next chapter, chapter 5 of Daniel. In the prayer, in this prayer dug up only last century, Nabonidus says how he was afflicted by a Jewish god with a serious skin disease for 7 years. He then goes on to write how he was healed by this very same God and how a Jewish religious figure from among the exiles told him to write a proclamation praising the Most High God rather than the gods of silver, gold, bronze, and the other metals and materials. I wonder if that sounds familiar. There are obvious similarities here with Daniel 4. After all, it's also recorded in history how Nabonidus was absent from Babylon for about 10 years, and his son helped govern the kingdom during that time. But it gets even more interesting than that. There is other evidence, other written evidence that Nebuchadnezzar had a physical ailment of some kind near the end of his life. But a text found in the sands of the Middle East that was discovered seems to refer to some kind of mental disorder afflicting Nebuchadnezzar and perhaps allowing him to neglect and leave Babylon, and his son instead came to reign in his stead for a little while. Unfortunately, though, this This text, much like the prayer that was discovered only 80 years, are so fragmented that scholars fiercely debate what they actually say and what they actually mean, and can't come to any firm agreements, conclusions one way or the other. So that is all to say that there is evidence. What we can draw from this is that there is evidence that something mysterious happened to one of the final great kings of Babylon. Something mysterious happened to one of the great final kings of Babylon. I personally read Daniel 4 as a true event and a retelling of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. But ultimately, the chapter is not asking us to solve a mystery hidden deep in archaeology. It is asking us a much more important question. And that is, who rules the rulers? And what happens when the rulers neglect their rule? So let's look more closely at the dream itself. Now, while a great cosmic tree reaching into heaven might sound strange to us, believe it or not, it would not have sounded so strange in the ancient Near Eastern world. An image of an enormous cosmic tree was widely known in ancient art and literature. This is one of many examples of ancient Near East cosmic trees found scattered throughout antiquity. In Egyptian art, the goddess of Hathor could be pictured as a tree reaching toward heaven. In Babylonian mythology, enormous trees could stretch down toward the underworld and up to the heavens. And Assyrian kings were often associated with sacred trees as guardians of order in the world under their control. Sometimes, just sometimes, the king themselves could even be personified by the tree. The idea was that the tree, that a good king connected the rule of the gods with the life of earth. His job was to maintain order, protect the vulnerable, and provide for their people. His greatness, the king's greatness, was meant to be a shelter, a stability, a provision for those living underneath his rule. Now, Israel used this imagery as well. In Ezekiel 17, royal dynasties, both good and evil, are pictured as great trees. And in Ezekiel 31, Assyria is described as a towering cedar tree. Birds nested in its branches. Animals gave birth beneath its shade. Nations lived under its shadow. But the tree became proud because of its great height, and so God cut it down. I wonder if that sounds familiar. And of course, trees are not the only things in the Bible that reach towards heaven in pride. In Genesis 11, the people of Babel attempted to build a tower reaching to the heavens so that they could make a name for themselves. And now, centuries later, in the same land as Babel, another ruler has become great, reached toward heaven in an attempt to make a name for himself. So when Nebuchadnezzar described this tree, Daniel didn't need much time to understand what it meant, right? He knew full well what it meant. Verse 20 onwards. Daniel said, "The tree you saw, which grew and became strong so that its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, and in which was food for all, under which beasts of the field found shade, and in whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is you, O king. It is you. Nebuchadnezzar was this tree. His kingdom had become vast, so much so that other nations became dependent upon Babylon. People lived under his authority. But notice what the tree was doing. It wasn't simply just standing there, standing tall, standing strong, standing mighty and powerful. It was feeding people. It was sheltering animals. It was providing care, a place for birds to come and dwell. The greatness of the tree existed for the life of others. Now that is important because Nebuchadnezzar did not create himself, nor did he create the very kingdom that he reigned over. Daniel made that very clear to him in chapter 2. You, O king, the King of kings, he said, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory. God gave Nebuchadnezzar this kingdom, this greatness. It was all real. It was all there, but it was borrowed, not owned. The kingdom was a gift from God for Nebuchadnezzar to rule. It was both a gift and a responsibility. And then as we read, the watcher, the angel, descended and ordered the tree cut down. And verse 17 tells us why. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will and sets over it the lowliest of men. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was the source of Babylon's greatness. God wanted to remind him that he was only a steward. And yet the stump would remain. And so judgment was coming, but restoration was possible. The tree could stand again, we read in this chapter, only if the king finally learnt his lesson, that it's actually the King of heaven who rules. Now, when Daniel heard this dream, verse 19, it says that he was alarmed. Alarmed. Now that sounds a little bit odd, don't you think? After all, Nebuchadnezzar had conquered Daniel's homeland, taken him from his family, and destroyed Jerusalem. One might expect for Daniel to go, yeah, about time. About time. Yes, God is coming back, going to destroy Babylon, and we're going to get to go back home. Awesome. No, he doesn't respond with delight. He responds with compassion. Daniel knew God had handed Judah over and given Nebuchadnezzar authority for a season. And Daniel's own responsibility was to serve faithfully to Nebuchadnezzar and to speak truthfully to him, even if it would cost him his own life. And so Daniel warned Nebuchadnezzar, verse 27. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be accepted to you. Break off from your sins by practicing righteousness and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity. Do you hear what Daniel's saying here? He's not saying, well, I told you so. Didn't you know this was going to happen? Didn't you know that Pride comes before the fall. Nebuchadnezzar, don't think so highly of yourself. God is in charge. Don't be so prideful. No. Daniel tells him to practice righteousness and to show mercy to the oppressed. Meaning that Nebuchadnezzar's sin was not only his personal pride. His pride had affected the way he ruled. The tree was supposed to provide food for all. It was supposed to offer shade and shelter. But Nebuchadnezzar had evidently used his greatness to serve himself while others suffered under his rule. He had forgotten the purpose for which God had given him his kingdom. And then God gave him 12 months. 12 months to listen, 12 months to change, 12 months to practice righteousness and show mercy. But 12 months later, nothing had changed. Nebuchadnezzar was walking on the roof of his royal palace, looking across the city, and said, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty?" Right? My city, my power, my majesty. Right? No mention of God. No mention of the people. No mention of his responsibility as king. Only himself. And while the words were still in his mouth, judgment fell. He was driven from human society. He ate like an ox, the grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven. His hair grew like eagle's feathers, and his nails became like birds' claws. This is an artist's interpretation of what Nebuchadnezzar might have looked like, painted by British artist William Blake in 1795. Some scholars suggest that Nebuchadnezzar was indeed struck down with some rare condition, some mental illness that does still exist in some parts of the world today, where people think that they are an animal. Others understand the language here in Daniel 4 as hyperbole or just pure symbolism. Whatever the case may be, the theological point is much more important and confronting. A man created in the image of God, entrusted with responsibility for others, begins living like a beast. The king who failed to rule humanely becomes less than a human. Pride in the end did not make Nebuchadnezzar greater. It actually ended up dehumanizing. Thank you. It ended up dehumanizing him. And this continued in verse 34. Until at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, he wrote, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. When he lifted his eyes toward heaven, his reason returned. God restored his kingdom. He restored it. He restored Nebuchadnezzar's greatness. And Nebuchadnezzar ended his proclamation by saying, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble." Whether this change of heart lasted long, we don't know for certain. But we do know, at least for the time being, Nebuchadnezzar learnt his lesson. Heaven rules, not him. And God-given greatness comes with God-given responsibility. God-given greatness comes with God-given responsibility. So what does Daniel 4 have to do with us? Well, the obvious application is pride. All right, as I said earlier, that is what many of us have become accustomed to when reading this chapter. Don't be like Nebuchadnezzar. Don't become proud. All right, Nebuchadnezzar looked across Babylon like a self-made man, forgetting that his power and glory came from God. And let's face it, we can do the same. We can do the same. We can look at our homes, our careers, our finances, our families, our abilities, our achievements, the opportunities that have been given to us, and quietly thank ourselves and go, good on you. You lived a pretty good life. Look at all that you've accomplished for yourself. Look what belongs to me. But we believe that everything we have is ultimately a gift from God. And so all glory belongs to Him. All glory belongs to Him, not to us. And so yes, one of the applications here is to not allow pride to set in. But I do not think that Daniel 4 lets us stop there. I don't think he lets us stop there. The question is not only, have I thanked God for what He has given me? The question is also, why has God given this to me? Who is meant to find shelter beneath my branches? Why has God given me what He has? Who is it ultimately meant to bless? What God gives us is not merely gifts to enjoy. It is a trust to use for His glory and for the good of others. All for His glory and for the good of others. And nowhere, of course, do we see that more clearly than in the person of Jesus Himself. Nebuchadnezzar, after all, used greatness to magnify himself. But what did Jesus do? He possessed all authority, yet came not to be served, but to serve and give His life. Nebuchadnezzar used power to oppress. What did Jesus do? He used His power to heal, welcome, forgive, and bring life to others. And this finally brings us back to Acts chapter 1. Acts chapter 1. The risen Jesus is about to ascend, and His disciples ask, Lord, will You at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? And what does Jesus say? He redirects His attention. He redirects their attention. He says, no, you will receive power. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Jesus redirects their gaze from the future to the present. From the future to the present. And after Jesus ascended, two angels came and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? What are you doing? Jesus will return. He will complete what He has begun. The stone of Daniel 2 will grow into a mountain, filling the entire earth. But until It does. And until Jesus returns, we are to go out and be Spirit-filled witnesses in his name. In other words, the church is not meant to be just a waiting room of stargazers. We are meant to look upward, yes, but only in worship. And we are to look outward, yes, in witness to the one we worship. And church, this again speaks directly to our visioning process. Our visioning process and our conversations about purpose and the responsibility God has given us as a church, as a people. All right, we have been called to love God, worship God, lift our eyes toward heaven, remember him as our giver, and to give all glory to him. We have been called to love others, to love people, to love each other, to love those not in this room, to practice righteousness, to show mercy to all, and to use what God has entrusted to us to provide care, welcome, and hope. And we are to share life. That is, we are to be witnesses. Jesus has called us to be and to share good news of the gospel that has come, good news of the gospel that is found in him. This church, this building, this place, you and me, we are not here. We are not here as Tweed Coast Community Church merely to preserve ourselves. That's not our purpose. Not merely to maintain our activities, not just to make us comfortable and to pat ourselves on the back. God has entrusted us with people, gifts, resources, property, opportunities, and the gospel itself, all for a God-given purpose. And it's not to earn or prove our worth as God's people. We are already loved. We are already saved. We are already empowered by his Holy Spirit, but we are empowered for a purpose, church. And that purpose is so that people might find shelter beneath our branches, so that people might be fed with the good news of Jesus. So that everything that God has entrusted us might be used to glorify him for the good of others. So church, let's hear the message of Daniel 4 for us this morning. We have a purpose. We have a responsibility. Let us not get lost in our blessings that we forget that we have been blessed to be a blessing. May we not be like Nebuchadnezzar and become prideful and neglect our responsibility. Instead, let us live in the power and presence of God and carry the name and blessings of Jesus to Bogngar, Cabarita Beach, and to the ends of the Tweed Coast and beyond. All for the glory of God. So, church, Daniel 4 began with a king flourishing like a great tree. It continued with a warning that his greatness was borrowed and that he was to be accountable. It showed us a king who looks across Babylon and sees what he has built. But it ends with that same king lifting up his eyes toward heaven and acknowledging that it is the God Most High who in fact rules over all. And Acts 1. Acts 1 shows us disciples staring into heaven, waiting for Jesus to come back promptly. come back promptly. And how they are instead told to stop waiting around and instead to get on with the job of being witnesses to Jesus in this world. So may we lift our eyes toward heaven. May we receive everything God has given us, entrusted with humility. May we love God, love each other, love the people of this community, and share life and good news with them all until He returns. Amen.